ECOWAS has long been regarded as a beacon of regional integration in West Africa, fostering economic cooperation, political stability, and collective security. However, recent challenges, including political instability, military coups, economic disparities, and growing skepticism about regional governance, have raised pressing questions about the organization's cohesion and effectiveness. The departure of key member states and the resurgence of nationalistic sentiment further complicate the trajectory of West African regionalism. Good afternoon, distinguished guests, colleagues, and participants. I'm Oluwaseun Teller, Head of the Future of Diplomacy at the University of Johannesburg's Institute for the Future of Knowledge. On behalf of the Institute, it is my pleasure to welcome you to this timely and significant webinar titled From Integration to Disintegration, ECOWAS and the Future of Regionalism in Africa. As we gather here today, we must critically assess ECOWAS's achievements, its current fractures, and what these developments mean for the broader African integration agenda, including SADC, EAC, other regional economic communities, as well as the AU. Will ECOWAS overcome these setbacks and become stronger? Or are we witnessing the gradual fragmentation of one of Africa's most prominent regional blocs? More importantly, what lessons can be drawn for the future of regionalism across the continent? Our distinguished panelists will provide in-depth analysis of these issues, and I encourage all participants to engage actively in this discussion. Let us seize this opportunity to explore pragmatic solutions that can strengthen regionalism in Africa. Once again, welcome, and I look forward to a fruitful conversation. At this juncture, I invite the chair of today's event, Professor Dorcas Ertung, from the International Center for Nonviolence at Durban University of Technology in South Africa. Prof, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Teller, for that introduction. Good evening, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here today to chair this webinar on regionalism. A warm welcome to you and our esteemed speakers who have joined us today. And so we're looking at a very important and interesting discussion from integration to disintegration, ECOWAS, and the future of regionalism in Africa. Before I hand over to our esteemed guests, let me add some of my thoughts and sentiments to what Dr. Teller has already established to give us some context. So ECOWAS could be described as a regional bloc for economic integration. For others, it is responsible for bringing some level of political stability and security in the sub-region. Others see it as promoting democracy, taking a strong stance against unconstitutional changes of government. On the other hand, one can argue that it has struggled. It is struggling, and perhaps it is ambitious in its goals and policies. In some instances, its credibility has come into question, as some policies are not enforced consistently, and some larger member states have more influence on the organization. Of course, the biggest threat has been the military coups in Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. In the last 4 years alone, there have been 7 coups in West and Central Africa, 4 of which have been in West Africa. And so this holds quite a lot of meaning as to governance in the sub-region. And so a main question, I think, on everyone's mind is, what does this mean for the future of ECOWAS? A more important question is, what are the implications for the populations of ECOWAS, whose best interest should be the focus of these transitions? How will this affect employment, poverty, criminality, and insecurity in the sub-region? Another question is, will the cases like Mali and Niger lead to a new wave of military regimes? And what does this mean for democracy in the sub-region? So quite a lot of questions and so on. And so is this the new norm for ECOWAS, where we have different states creating their own alternative structures and so on? How will these relationships be maintained? Are there any areas of convergence, even if there are differences in systems of governance and so on? So a lot of questions. And the bigger one, of course, is what does this mean for regionalism on the continent? There are many other regional economic entities looking at ECOWAS and as example of what they should attain for. So to shed light on these developments, we have experts who will engage us in a critical discussion. This is an evolving process. This is something that still will transform politics in the sub-region. And so this webinar, thank you to IFK, the Institute for the Future of Knowledge, we can begin to think about some of these really difficult questions. And so we have three esteemed experts, Dr. Adeoye Oakinola, he's the head of research and teaching at the Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation at the University of Johannesburg, South Africa. We have Professor Egosa Osage, the Director General of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs in Nigeria, and Professor Arthur Motambara, the former Deputy Prime Minister of Zimbabwe and the Director of the Institute for the Future of Knowledge, University of Johannesburg. And so I will hand over to Dr. Akinola. You have 15 minutes. Please, if you have comments and questions, please put them in the chats as we move along. Dr. Akinola, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks to the Institute for the Future of Knowledge. And thanks for Dr. Taylor and his team for inviting me to intervene in this very important conversation. Maybe I should just start by reflecting on the brief history of ECOWAS. The Economic Community of West African States, usually called ECOWAS, was established on the 28th May 1975 through the Treaty of Lagos, and the primary goal of promoting economic integration among West African countries. The treaty was signed by the following countries under Article 62(1). And the first country is Benin, Burkina Faso, formerly called Upper Volta, Cote d'Ivoire, Gambia, Ghana, Guinea-Bissau, Liberia, Mali, Mauritania, Niger, Nigeria, Senegal, and Sierra Leone. Membership of ECOWAS was not based on adherence to certain criteria as applicable to the European Union, but it was based on geographical location. Before the establishment of ECOWAS, community in the region have fostered cross-border cooperation initiatives for peace, security, commerce, and sustainable development, particularly in the borderland communities. For instance, and I will start with the Lake Chad Basin Commission, usually called LCBC, which was established in May 1964. That was proud the establishment of ECOWAS. It was established by 4 countries bordering Lake Chad, which are Cameroon, Niger, Nigeria, and Chad. But the Republic of Central Africa later became a member in 1996, and Libya also joined in 2008. And the aims of this bloc, of this organization, is to promote cooperation and overseas water and other natural resource usage in the basin. Also in December 1970, that was also before the establishment of ECOWAS, Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, those are the 3 breakaway countries, established the Liptako Goma Authority, LGA, headquartered in Burkina Faso, to create a regional framework for developing mining, energy, water resources, agriculture, livestock, and fisheries in the LGA area. Following reforms in 2017, the LGA expanded its focus to strengthen security cooperation among our member states. preventing radicalization, insurgencies, and addressing both intra and inter-community conflicts. And despite their memberships in ECOWAS, these countries have maintained, this country maintained active collaboration through the LGA, demonstrating its continued relevance in regional development and security efforts. We also have the Mano River Union, MRU, which was established in October 1973. That was also before the establishment of ECOWAS, which was through the Mano River Declaration by two countries, Liberia and Sierra Leone. But Guinea later joined in 1980. And this organization is committed to promoting peace, unity, and economic prosperity among its member states. In recent years, we have new initiatives for cross-border defense security cooperation, which have actually emerged, and we can mention some of them. We have the G5 Sahel, which was established in December 2014 by the following countries: Burkina Faso, Chad, Mali, Mauritania, and Niger. We also have the Accra Initiative, popularly called AI, not artificial intelligence, but Accra Initiative, which was also established in 2017 by Benin Republic, Burkina Faso, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Togo. And apart from this, we also have the Multinational Joint Task Force, MJTF, which was established by Benin, Cameroon, Chad, Niger, and Nigeria for the purpose of counter-terrorism, particularly with the destructive tendency of the dreaded Boko Haram terrorist organization. And more recently, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso have reactivated the old alliance by establishing what they call the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, in September 2023. And that was in the midst of the announcement of their intention to withdraw from ECOWAS, further reshaping regional security dynamics. Despite ECOWAS' initial core mandate of economic regionalism, over the years, ECOWAS expanded its mandate to include peace, security, and democratic governance, recognizing this important link or nexus between political stability, security, and economic development. This regional bloc became actively involved in promoting democracy and facilitating regional peace and security following the political crisis of the 1990s, particularly with ECOWAS intervention in Liberia, in Sierra Leone through the ECOWAS Standby Force, popularly called Economic Community of West African States Monitoring Group, ECOMOG, which was established in 1990. And this force was mandated to intervene in conflict situations, and its successes in Liberia in 1990, we could remember, led to the installation of President Charles Taylor in 2003, and it also led to the exit of the same president. We also remember his intervention in Sierra Leone in 1997. We remembered that of Cote d'Ivoire, also the intervention of ECOMOG in Cote d'Ivoire. But the initial ECOMOG contingent of about 3,000 troops comprised of personnel from different West African countries, such as Nigeria, the Gambia, Ghana, and Sierra Leone, with Mali also later contributing additional forces. And the question one may ask is, what are those normative frameworks that have helped or enhance the effectiveness of ECOWAS to be able to perform many of those roles in the yesteryears? Absolutely, ECOWAS established very important legal and policy frameworks to promote regionalism within the West African region and also to uphold democracy in that bloc. And maybe we can begin to speak first to the protocol, relating to the free movement of persons, residents, and establishments in 1997. which for me is one of the most important instruments for economic integration. We also have the Declaration of Political Principles in 1991. And of course, ECOWAS strongly believe in the liberty of West Africans and their inalienable rights to participate through free and democratic processes in the framing of the society in which they live. We also have the ECOWAS Treaty, the 1993 revised version of ECOWAS Treaty, which incorporates political cooperation and conflict prevention mechanism as part of the regional integration processes. Apart from that, we also have the protocol relating to the mechanism for conflict prevention, management, resolution, peacekeeping, and security in 1999. And this protocol authorizes ECOWAS to intervene in cases of threats to democracy, including military coups and unconstitutional government changes. And in 2001, ECOWAS Protocol on Democracy and Good Governance was also adopted, and this marked a very significant step in institutionalizing democratic norms in the West African region, emphasizing constitutional free and fair elections, and also trying to provide some form of democratic oversight over the military and the outright rejection of unconstitutional changes of government. The protocol further empowers ECOWAS to impose sanctions when necessary to enforce its objectives. We also have the most recent ECOWAS Vision 2020 and the new Vision 2050, which came into force in 2020. And the vision tagged ECOWAS of the peoples. That's why people sometimes question that why is ECOWAS still not the ECOWAS of the people? The intention was to have the ECOWAS of the people, which will be able to guarantee peace and prosperity for all West Africans. And the other remote aim is also to deepen democratic governance as a pillar of regional development and stability. Of course, sometimes we speak about ECOWAS' failure to increase the government's performance of civilian administration or prevent democratic autocracies. But the major criticism of ECOWAS or critique of ECOWAS has been its inability to combat manipulative tenor elongations and illegitimate constitutional changes for power consolidation by few political elites in the zone. And we also have, because for ECOWAS also to be able to actually safeguard these protocols and to implement it, we have some institutional frameworks that will also assist the regional bloc to carry out its activities. And I will just mention some of them. We have the ECOWAS Commission also, the ECOWAS Commission that oversees democratic governance programs and political affairs. The ECOWAS Commission is responsible for the day-to-day activities of the regional body. We also have the ECOWAS Court of Justice, which adjudicates human rights and governance-related disputes. Apart from that, we have the ECOWAS Parliament, and the ECOWAS Parliament in legal institutions and regional legal institutions provides a platform for democratic representation and disputes management. Then we have the ECOWAS Parliament, which is like the legal institution of the regional body, which provides a platform for democratic representation and participation in decision making. We also have the ECOWAS Electoral Assistance Division, which supports member states in conducting free and fair elections through election monitoring and technical assistance. And we also have the ECOWAS Standby Force, which people in the 1990s will know as ECOMOG, which most of the time will be deployed for enforcing the decisions of ECOWAS, particularly in terms of peace and security, and also sometimes in terms of electoral disputes and cases that has to do with unconstitutional regime changes. Through these frameworks, ECOWAS aims to continuously play an active role in promoting and safeguarding democracy, peace, and stability in West Africa. However, the current situation where three countries under military regimes in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Chad are pulling out of ECOWAS has called into question the bloc's handling of military incursions and democratic promotion in the zone. On the other hand, while one may understand the governance challenges and democratic bastardization by several civilian administrations in the ECOWAS zone, it is pertinent to also exercise caution in the acceptance, celebration, and the seeming legitimacy many people present to the military regimes in the Sahel. Many are even celebrating the coup leaders as Pan-Africanists because of their anti-West postures. But I still strongly believe that a military regime is not only illegal, but is an aberration. And if you ask the military regimes in Burkina Faso, in Mali, or in Niger, they will gladly tell you that they themselves have outlawed military incursion in politics. And surely, military coup will constitute treason in these countries under a military regime. But because of the time, I won't be able to do a stage-by-stage interventions of ECOMOG or ECOWAS military force in many West African countries, including Sierra Leone in 1997, including Mali in 2013. We also remember the ECOWAS Operation Restore Democracy in Gambia in 2016, which are some of the successful interventions of ECOWAS in the bid to promote peace, security, and democracy in the West African zone. Thank you. I will hold my peace now. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you very much for giving us quite a good history and evolution of ECOWAS. And in the comments, somebody has asked for a paper from you because you have successfully captured this. So perhaps it is something to think about. And in reflecting on your presentation, what I draw from it in some way is that ECOWAS has many successes and contributions in peace, security, democracy, development, cross-border defense, and cooperation. So ECOWAS has stood the test of time. And I think the question of the Alliance of Sahel States, is this another test for ECOWAS to overcome? And can ECOWAS again stand the test of this? So ECOWAS has a lot to teach us in the art of regionalism and how you evolve into a regional organization. So thank you very much, Dr. Akinola, for that context. We will move on to our next presenter. Professor Egosa Osage is the Director General of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs, and he will speak on ECOWAS's integration and disintegration. You have the floor, Prof.
Well, thank you. Let me extend my felicitations to the organizers of this conference, this webinar, on this very important subject. Now, let me begin with some conceptual issues. You know, I think that integration and disintegration appear to be at, polar ends. In other words, one is regarded as the opposite, of the other. Now, whereas integration seems to be a phased process that can add on as it grows, disintegration appears normatively to have a finality, even though it can be seen in terms of being also process-driven. In other words, there are degrees of integration and degrees of disintegration. And I think that, ought to be the operational, conceptual handle that should guide our analysis of ECOWAS in this regard. But I would want to deviate from the nuances of integration and disintegration and rather talk about fragmentation. Fragmentation meaning that, what is happening in ECOWAS is not necessarily disintegration, but it's some form of, if you like, fragmentation that would not necessarily imply disintegration. And this is in the order of regional integration models, as we have seen them. So states come together when they have consensus and there's agreement, and states also fall out and disagree, even when the structures don't fully disintegrate. So permit me, moderator, to put fragmentation as the conceptual handle on the board. Once we talk fragmentation, then it is easy to analyze what is happening presently in ECOWAS as not exceptional, but as another phase of a process that has been on even since the establishment of ECOWAS in 1975. We've had one or two countries come in and go out. We've had, integration within ECOWAS itself that involve only a few members and not all the members, such as, for instance, we have the Francophonie front. The Francophonie countries even have common currency. They have central bank, arrangements and so on. Within, ECOWAS itself, we've had, like the earlier speaker talked about, we've had the Lake Chad Basin, we've had the Mano River Authority. These are subsets, of the overarching integration framework that ECOWAS represents. Now, ECOWAS, has grown in leaps and bounds, and it is true what the concept note for this webinar has, that ECOWAS at several points became a model for regional integration, not only in Africa, but also elsewhere, especially in the global South. Now, ECOWAS started out as in an economic community. For a long time, it was searching for the kinds of things that would make it grow into a strong economic community, a community that offers a common market, a community that allows it to even have a common currency, a community that, is driven along the lines of the protocol that allows for free movements of persons and goods, a community that then adopts a common passport for ECOWAS, a community that, has in its frame the informal trade and movements across the region. And ECOWAS then, moved rapidly as greater political challenges came to the political arena. So that by 1989, 1990, with the onset of the civil war in Liberia, ECOWAS had to respond to what many people forget, namely that the NPFL, the Patriotic Front of Liberia, began as a regional rebel movement that had forces from not only Liberia, but also Sierra Leone and Ghana and Nigeria and Burkina Faso and the Ivory Coast. And all of that, linked to the strong man at the time in Libya, who was providing the muscle for the MPFL and Charles Taylor. So the ECOMOG, response was something built on regional consensus. To say there was a collective threat. There was a threat to the collective security of the region at the time, and because of the multinational composition of the MPFL, you required, that kind of force to respond to what was going on in Liberia, because, the intelligence agencies had reports that suggested that Liberia was to become the hub for a region-wide, movement that was to extend to Ghana, the Ivory Coast, and Nigeria, and so on and so on. So from the 1990s, ECOMOG experience and so on, ECOWAS moved rapidly in the direction of politics first, in terms of peacekeeping operations, as you know, extended to Sierra Leone and to Guinea-Bissau and Equatorial Guinea and so on and so on. So a new phase came in for ECOWAS, and you then moved from simple economic integration to now a political alignment. And then you could see that even within, ECOMOG itself, we already started to see indications of some possible tensions, within the fold. But remember that the 1990s also coincided with the period of the so-called global democratic revolution. So the whole global movement, the times were defined by democratic transitions and democratization processes that went everywhere. And for many of the gatekeepers of the neoliberal onslaught that sought to make the world safe for neoliberal regimes, the ECOWAS, became one of those agencies that, you had to embrace. And so ECOWAS increasingly, became one of the anchors for democratization in West Africa, and rapidly moved into governance issues, human rights, which were very critical to the transitions that were happening in West Africa, because don't forget that West Africa itself was a hotbed of military governments and authoritarian regimes at the time. So this was, part of the showcase, the metamorphosis, that ECOWAS had to undergo. And, by the time ECOWAS emerged fully from the reforms and democratization and governance, interventions, ECOWAS became, a fully institutionalized, regional body that addressed issues of constitutionalism, had issues of not just human rights, but also its enforcement, had the parliament, had, a court of justice, and so on. And this was like the high point, of ECOWAS as a regional body. The protocols on good governance, on free movements of persons, and so on. But, there came new challenges, to the region. And these challenges came via the spread of, terrorism, and banditry and violent extremism, that seemed to snowball from one country to the other. Nigeria had its fair share of this with Boko Haram and the entry of ISIS and, those kinds of mobile movements that enveloped the region very quickly. but had the Sahel at the center. Now, it would appear that this was something that hit the region at its most vulnerable points, and unlike what it took to get ECOMOG to the rescue, many of the countries lacked individual capacities to cope with the new challenges that came with terrorism, especially. And these countries were, were losing territories, to all of these people. And then, of course, in the desperation, there were all kinds of military alliances that then came, especially in the Sahel. And, things were not improving. Security got worse, and the people were, at their lowest ebbs, because within security, you had, very monumental retrogressions in whatever economic leaps and recoveries many of these countries had undergone, with democracy and democratization. And then, things started to give way, because don't forget, that this is a region that has not a tradition, but is quite familiar with, military interventions and so on. And that seemed to be the easiest way to deal with, the new challenges. If things were not going to improve and so on in these countries, people got to the levels of, tolerance, and some things had to give. And so after Mali came Guinea, came Burkina Faso, came Niger, and the military was on the on the rise in this region, and ECOWAS had to respond to these kinds of unforeseen catastrophes, beginning with Mali. And ECOWAS, tried to use its framework that allowed for, mediation, by ECOWAS authorities. There's a team, a contact group that was set up to engage the Malian, military leaders. Had President Goodluck Jonathan of Nigeria. In Guinea, it was the same approach. And things were not moving as effectively as one would expect, but there was room for back-end diplomacy and mediation, and then that was going on. And then, things got worse. Burkina Faso follows, and Niger follows. And the geopolitical complications then started to play a very large part in what was going on, because you had fairly radical military officers, especially in Burkina Faso and Niger, joined together with those, very radical forces in Mali. And it was time to begin to say, look, we've had enough. You haven't been able to deliver on the insecurity situation. Things have gotten worse and so on. And now it's time to change, our foreign partners. Now, all of these things led to new forms of, coalition building, and what I started out with as fragmentation. And this is where we are today. So the Association of Sahelian States and so on, has come to stay. Now, because ECOWAS, with hindsight,
round up.
I should stop?
No, you have 1 more minute. Thank you.
Okay, so let me stop. I have exhausted the minute. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, we can take it up in the discussion phase. Thank you very much for your presentation. The term fragmentation and not disintegration. The benefits of regionalism are not lost, even with the presence of the Alliance of Sahel States. And for me, one question that emerges is how can ECOWAS maintain positive relationships with the Alliance of Sahel States, as it has tried to do with other subunits in the region? And so this is a critical question for how ECOWAS will engage going forward, because whether it's ECOWAS, whether it's the Alliance of Sahel States, the threats that they face are the same. The porosity of borders, the movement of illicit products and activities, all of these will impact on all these regional entities. Thank you very much. I will now move on to Professor Arthur Mutambara, the former Deputy Prime Minister of Zimbabwe and the Director of the Institute for the Future of Knowledge from the University of Johannesburg. Prof, please go ahead.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to share with your audience. Now, I think it's important that we understand the successes of ECOWAS and the failures of ECOWAS and be able to learn from both. Let us learn from what has worked. Let us learn from what has not worked. Number two, let us understand the motivation between the regional bodies. Why do we have ECOWAS? Why do we have SADC? Why do we have the East African Community? They're never meant to be an end in themselves. They're meant to be regional blocs to build towards African integration, to build towards the African Union. Some people forget that. You should not analyze ECOWAS as an end in itself or analyze SADC as an end in itself. No, remember, the motivation is continental integration. The motivation is the United States of Africa. We must remember that. So that when we come up with our strategies within the regions, we have clarity on the objective of regional blocs. Now, integration versus disintegration. What we want to do is to say, what can we do to avoid disintegration? We don't want disintegration. We want integration. But unless and until we understand why there's disintegration in ECOWAS, we'll never win in SADC. We'll never win in the East African Community. We'll never win in ECOWAS. We'll never win in Africa. We must pay attention to economics. You talk about intervening to secure democracy, intervene when there's a threat to democracy. How about intervening when there's lack of economic prosperity? What about intervening when the economies are failing? So in addition to addressing the obvious, that we want democracy, we want this, and we don't want military rule, you are only concerned about a country when there's a coup d'etat and you want to intervene. How about when there's economic collapse? Where is the provision in ECOWAS to say, when the people in Mali are suffering from economic collapse, we are going to intervene to fix the economy? We need to understand that when we say ECOWAS of the people, we are talking about economics, the quality of life, economic prosperity. So in these regional blocs, let us put a focus on saying we want all our members to prosper economically. Democracy is a means to economic prosperity, not an end in itself. When we have French neocolonialism in West Africa, the French controlling African economies, where was the ECOWAS strategy to say, France, we're going to stop you from abusing African countries? What you're doing in Mali, what you're doing in Senegal, what you're doing in Burkina Faso, in all these Francophone African countries, where was ECOWAS in terms of saying no to France? You left it to the individual countries. Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali are challenging France on their own and winning. So unless and until as Africans in ECOWAS, we have a regional strategy on key issues like number one, the economy, number two, French colonialism, French neocolonialism. Don't leave it to countries to handle France. France should have been attacked at ECOWAS level. France should have been attacked at the AU level. Now, when you leave countries to suffer under France, you are inviting young people who are bold to carry out coup d'etats and challenge France. Once you allow economies to collapse, the people in Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger to suffer economically, you allow a coup d'etat to take. We don't defend coup d'etats. We're explaining why they happen. They happen because the economies are collapsing. And the democracy you talk about, what about stolen elections? If there are stolen elections in Mali, stolen election in Niger, in Burkina Faso, in Zimbabwe, where is the intervention to stop these leaders who are democratically elected and yet actually they're fraudulent? They've stolen elections, but because they've gone through an election, you welcome them. Oh, you are a product of a democratic process, so you are a member of ECOWAS. But we know they stole elections in their countries. We know they've been in power for 30 years and 40 years. Where is the ECOWAS position to say we will not tolerate stolen elections among our members? We will intervene if you steal elections. In the same way that we talk about intervening when there's a coup d'etat, we must be talking about intervening when these African leaders who claim to be products of democracy steal elections and come to ECOWAS as legitimate leaders. If we don't do that, there will be disintegration. If we don't do that, there will be coup d'etats. As an answer, one, to economic prosperity, as an answer to French neocolonialism, as an answer to stolen elections. Beneficiation, for example. Where is the ECOWAS strategy to say we don't want African countries in ECOWAS, in SADC, in East African Community, to sell raw materials? We must only be selling value-added products. We want beneficiation on the continent. If you have no policy like that in ECOWAS, in SADC, in the African Union, you leave it to young people who are bold, who take over power by coup d'etat and start to beneficiate, start controlling their minerals and beneficiating them. So unless and until ECOWAS, SADC, and the East African Community and AU as a broader organization embraces these progressive policies at a regional level and continental level, you leave it to countries to address these matters. Sometimes when they address them using a coup d'etat. They address them using bold young men, young women. Just last year, Joe Biden went to Angola, had a meeting with, Zambia, Angola, and DRC. What were they talking about? The Lobito corridor, to build a corridor to take minerals from Africa to Europe. Shame on these Africans. How foolish can we be as Africans? The meeting in Angola with Joe Biden should have been about Inga Dam. How can we work together with America to build Inga Dam? Inga Dam will produce electricity for the entirety of Southern Africa. And of course, we can also partner in mining with them, but we beneficiate the minerals in the DRC, in Zambia, in Angola, and we sell refined products to America. But what do? The Lobito corridor, where 3 African countries met Joe Biden, they were discussing how to build a train to take minerals from the DRC, from Zambia, from Angola to America, to Europe. Shame on us. Unless we as ECOWAS, unless we as East African Community, as SADC, actively promote economic prosperity through beneficiation and value addition. You leave it to young people who are bold to carry out coup d'etats and then build Ingadem. We have to ask ourselves, why are coup d'etats taking place? We must address the reasons why the disintegration is taking place. And also, we must always remember, ECOWAS is a means to an end. SADC is a means to an end. East African Community is a means to an end. What is the end? Continental integration, where the African continent, consisting of 1.4 billion Africans, collective GDP of $2.5 trillion, is working together as an economic colossus. When we are united as one economy called Africa, with 1.4 billion people and $2.5 trillion, we can negotiate better deals with China, better deals with America, better deals with Europe. But what do we do? A little deal between Botswana and America, a little deal between Angola and Europe. South Africa is too small to be consequential. Nigeria is a Mickey Mouse economy. Nigeria is not an economy. The economy that will make sense is the economy of ECOWAS, the economy of Africa. As big as Nigeria is, in global terms, it's meaningless as an economy. And Nigeria must understand that. South Africa is not consequential economically under globalization. ECOWAS, East African Community, SADC must be understood as a means to continental integration, the African Union, United States of Africa. Beyond Africa, we're not talking about global Africa, Africa and its diaspora. These big narratives beyond the regional state, the regional bloc, are important so that we can unlock economies of scale, so that the quality of life of our people in Mali, our people in Niger, our people in Burkina Faso can get better. When we do that, there will be no need for a coup d'etat. If we don't do that, don't ask me why coup d'etats are taking place. There's a good reason why they're taking place. We must remove the rationale and the reason why young people in the Sahel regions are taking over and defeating the French, carrying out beneficiation, and driving their own economies. Yes, without democracy. It's a suboptimal answer, but it's a better answer than fraudulent elections. Men and women staying in power for 40 years, not delivering on the economy, and they're being welcomed in the AU. You are a product of democracy. And yet, the woman has been in power for 40 years through fraudulent elections. We must address those matters. So in conclusion, I'm emphasizing that we want integration. We don't want disintegration. But for us to get integration, we must understand the reasons why disintegration is taking place. If we don't address those reasons, there will be disintegration. And that will happen in SADC, that will happen in the East African Community, that will happen in ECOWAS. The war in the DRC right now. Where are we as the East African Community? Where is the African Union?
Okay, one more.
Yeah, I'm winding up. And some of those people are promoted by Westerners anyway. And so let's keep our eyes on the prize. The prize is the United States of Africa. Go back to Nkrumah. These regional blocs are a means to an end. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof, for reminding us what the end goal is. The end goal is African integration and the economic prosperity of its people. Two questions that emerge from me is how can ECOWAS maintain unity in the region with all these different sub-alliances? How can it be an example of good governance, economic development within its member states? And I believe the populations in West Africa, many citizens are watching how these military regimes will perform against other democracies. And so this is quite key that democracies in West Africa sit up and really show that democracy can work in this context. Thank you very much. We will open up the floor now for questions, comments, chats. This is a space for us to have critical discussions. This is an evolving process, I have said, and so we would like to hear your own views and perspectives, questions on perhaps what the future holds for ECOWAS, and any questions you might have for the panelists. Dr. Egbe, please, you can go ahead, and then after that, we will have Tumba Diodon. Please go ahead.
Yes, the first one is concerning African leaders. I doubt if African leaders believe in Pan-Africanism. For me, they are not Pan-Africanists. The reason is we have been having this Rex for a while, but yet integration is not to be done. That was one. Two, when we look the way our leaders behave, no one among them believe on the shared value of these Rex. So for me, I think although they can say how Pan-Africanist they are, but they are not Pan-Africanists. For me, they don't believe in Pan-Africanism. Or when we look, Pan-Africanism can also be a tool for integrating Africa. So I'd like Prof to elaborate more on that one. The second, when you go to Eastern Africa Community, when we look ECOWAS, when we look SADC, these RECs have the instrument or regulation related to governance and on how to hold democratic elections, even to solve their conflicts among their members. Yet, we're still struggling with quality of elections, yet we're still struggling with conflicts. So why RECs are struggling to make sure that their state members are there, their state members implement these regulations, which are related to governance, election quality, and solving of election. Thank you. No, solving of a conflict. Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. We'll take another question. Moses, can you please go ahead?
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank all the presenters. However, the first presenter said something about ECOWAS having different organs that perform different functions. I'm a Nigerian. Since 1999 till now, all the elections that have been conducted in Nigeria have had issues. They've been declared, there have been a lot of issues, electoral violence, the election has been seen as not free, not fair. And the ECOWAS election monitoring body, they come, they see all these things. Now, what are their recommendations? Is there any punishment for a society or a state in an ECOWAS country where elections are not free, where elections are not fair? Because all these things will continue to make people within that state who feel unhappy to continue to support more military government taking over. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for your comment question. Let me go read the chats. We have Dr. Victor who says, I do not see Africa integrating anytime soon. The challenge is corruption and bad governance. How long can the youth wait for prosperity? Can we find that answer in ECOWAS, in regional entities? United Africa is the answer to economic prosperity. Dr. Tony says, beneficiation in mining, agriculture will change the face of Africa. There has never been integration in Africa. Question is, how do we move forward to integrate Africa? Let's go back to the panelists. Professor Mutambara, you will start, then we'll go to Dr. Akinola, and then Professor Egosa. Please feel free to respond to the questions and comments in the chats. Then we'll do another round. Thank you.
Yeah, very briefly, your question, Madam Chairperson. ECOWAS, what can they do different? They must focus on economic prosperity. Is there economic prosperity in our member countries? They must focus on fighting France. They must pronounce themselves on French neocolonialism and make it a target and fight it as ECOWAS. They must promote and drive beneficiation in ECOWAS. Beyond those three, they must also make sure there are clean elections in their countries. Now, which ties into the last question from the audience. If the elections in Nigeria are problematic, or to use a better word, fraudulent, what moral authority does Nigeria have to condemn people in Mali or in Niger who are carrying out a coup d'etat because they're unhappy with stolen elections when Nigeria has stolen elections? So the moral authority of Nigeria, of ECOWAS, is undermined if their member states don't have free and fair elections. So let us find a way to make sure our elections in member countries of ECOWAS are clean, free, and fair. African leaders, you're very correct. They're not interested in integration. They just pay lip service. You know why? What is the logical conclusion of integration? A United States of Africa, how many presidents? One president, one cabinet, one army, one budget. There'll be one president in the continent, maybe coming from Gabon. So the current president of Nigeria will be a minister of tourism. Ramaphosa will be minister of agriculture. Mnangagwa will be minister of the youth. Now, these African leaders are not prepared to commit political suicide and become governors and ministers. They want to be a president of starving people. So they talk integration in ECOWAS, integration in ECOWAS, integration in the AU, but they don't like the end. The end is one country. The United States of America has one president. China has one president. India, one prime minister. What's so special about you Africans? Why do you need 55 people to lead you? Why? Which makes the point you are making that these leaders, are they committed to integrate? They are not for purely self-interest. Whereas if we talk about the ordinary people, if we have the United States of Africa, the quality of life of every African will go up. But there will be no president in Nigeria, there will be no president in South Africa, there will be no president in Tanzania. There will be one president for the continent. They are not interested in that. More significantly, we must move away from the notion of national sovereignty. We pay too much attention, national sovereignty, national interest. How about regional sovereignty? How about regional interests? How about continental sovereignty? We must migrate from national sovereignty to regional sovereignty. From national sovereignty to continental sovereignty. The continent is more important than the region. The region is more important than the country. You must be able to say, I'm an African first, a member of ECOWAS second, and a Nigerian third. And many Nigerians are not prepared to do that. To say I'm three in my country. Number one is the continent. Number two is the region. Number three in my country. We must get to a stage where we can say that as individuals and as leaders, we are not ready. Now, in terms of corruption and good governance, again, very important point. If there's corruption in our countries, if there's bad governance in our countries, this is the source of coup d'etats. You are stealing elections, you are stealing the money from the country, you are running the country to the ground, and consequently, young people say, let us pick up guns. And using guns will drive away corruption. So we must solve corruption in our member countries. I stop there.
Thank you. Dr. Akinola.
Thanks, Chair. I will just quickly run through what I have put together here, what I have jotted down from the question that was asked. Maybe I should also make this reflection on what Pan-Africanism is and what Pan-Africanism is not. And when we speak about Pan-Africanism, the question one may raise is what version or what understanding of Pan-Africanism are we speaking about? Depending on the lens in which you are using to view Pan-Africanism, do you see it in terms of just decolonization of Africa? Do you see in terms of resisting racialism in the America? Do you see it in terms of regional integration as promoted by leaders such as Kwame Nkrumah? Or do you want to see it in terms of the lens of someone like Julius Nyerere, who will rather present cooperative agriculture self-reliant and aid dependency? Or will you see it in terms of African Renaissance as promoted by Thabo Mbeki of South Africa, which believes in partnership to possibly achieve Pan-Africanism? Regional integration is just an aspect of Pan-Africanism. So you can't have someone that is Pan-African in orientation without necessarily subscribing to regional integration of the continent. I just wanted to say that. Secondly, when we talk about what is happening in West Africa currently, I think we also have, because I noted that we approach it, we internalize the issues without considering the global reconfigurations of powers and the influence of foreign influence in what is happening in West Africa. I recall vividly that at the time the waves of coup was sweeping in the early 2020s, people accused some of the global powers of influencing some of the young military boys to take over power, to shift the balance of power in Africa. And vividly, we have seen the exit of the West from those Sahel countries and the embrace and the legitimization of the East, talking about the China, the Russia, and all of that. People even alleged that some of the military boys that took over power just came back from military exercise in Russia. And we have seen the activities of some of those mercenaries also in many of the Sahelian countries. So it's not just about what is happening in the country, we also have to put it into context. And someone also spoke about ECOWAS, particularly talking about comradeship. That's why ECOWAS tried to put the tag that they are now changing to the ECOWAS of the people. Of course, they put it down in black and white, but ECOWAS is still the ECOWAS of heads of state. And who reads elections in most of the countries in Nigeria? Those are incumbent power. Those are the presidents that are members of ECOWAS making decisions in ECOWAS, even for somebody like the president of Nigeria, Bola Ahmed Tinubu. And many people will even question his electoral victory. And the same personality was the chair of ECOWAS when the military struck in Mali. And that was why the military sometimes would not see the difference between the democratic autocracy and military regime. And those things have played part in what is happening in West Africa. And maybe one may also say that, of course, we are talking about regionalization because of where Africa is. But if we also look at many societies that have integrated, particularly even the European Union, I don't think they really have sweet stories to tell, particularly with the exit of Britain and even the fragmentation in the European Union for now. Of course, if you ask me, maybe, but I won't put all my egg in one basket to actually close my eyes and push for extreme regionalism. Countries may still be able to find a way to sustain without actually integrating in terms of federalist approach to regionalism, as been suggested by many Pan-Africanists inclined regionalists in Africa. Thank you, Chair.
Bumi has a question. Given the experience from the various RECs, has regional integration accelerated continental integration or the contrary? So has it helped in some way to move us toward a united Africa, or has it not done so? I'm looking at this comments here from Jeffrey. Having presidents or prime ministers is not the problem. It's about good governance, and Africa can address that through the African Union. The Union should have a mechanism to rein on member countries that are corrupt and don't abide by principles of good governance. And how are countries performing on these indicators? I think that's a very good point to consider. When we talk about good governance, how are these member states performing before we even talk about ECOWAS and so on? And so AU and REX should not only focus on suspending members due to military coups, but equally focus on why coups are happening: bad governance, injustices, inequalities, underdevelopment, and poverty. Thank you very much for that comment. Going to the chat, I see yes, Candy says, how do we advance Pan-Africanism when the neighbors are weak? A country is as strong as its neighbors. Again, we have a regional institutions or regional setups where the power dynamics are quite different. Just trying to read through the questions. Moses says, ECOWAS court judgments are not implemented in Nigeria and many other states. What will you say of that? Let me just throw that out as well to the panelists. Professor Osagi, there are questions here. It's not directed to anyone. Perhaps you can give some views, and then we'll go back to Professor Mutambara and then Dr. Akinola. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Let me address the question of implementation of judgments by the ECOWAS court. There are two ways to answer that question. And coming from a Nigerian, that question ought to be aware, that the kinds of cases that have gone to the ECOWAS court are cases that appear to be, how would we say, cases that appear, to the people who canvass them, not likely to get favorable judgments in the country. In other words, ECOWAS Court of Justice has offered a viable alternative, an option, the aggrieved parties who feel that they cannot find justice within their countries, and therefore they have gone to ECOWAS. So it's probably also easier to understand why those judgments are not implemented. But the fact that such an option exists at all, strengthens the structures of accountability and the enforcement of human rights within the West African region. So the other thing is that all of the other institutions, take the parliament, for instance, the parliament has addressed, cross-cutting issues such as gender and, the kinds of issues of equity and so on within member states. So I would say that they are all in the throes of developing and becoming stronger. And perhaps it's also time to get back to the kinds of things that the Sahelian Association of Sahelian States, it's itself getting into. There are people who come from these countries that also have the option of going to the court. I think that the coming days are going to be very interesting. The final point I want to make is that, I disagreed with the use of disintegration at the beginning because while this fragmentation is going on, there's a lot of back-end diplomatic maneuvers that are going on that continue to suggest that there's hope that these countries would come back one way or the other to the ECOWAS fold. The lesson in all of this, of course, is that no regional body is immune from fragmentation. and that we learn lessons from all of these things that would guide us, not only in SADC and IGAD and all of them, but even for the AU. So these are building blocks, and we must learn the lessons that come from all of them. There are things that work. Those are the things that should be emphasized. There are things that bind us together. The economy is very strong. Yes, it is true that ECOWAS is fragmenting along these lines, but the volume of trade across those boundaries has not diminished at all, even though some of them have closed their borders. Informal trade is going on, and that is not reducing. Human trafficking through Niger is going on, and that is not reducing. There are networks of people from Niger, from Mali, from Burkina Faso and Nigeria and Ghana that are involved in all of these things. So it is not as if the dream of a common front for West Africa has come to an end. The non-state segment of ECOWAS remains very active and together. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Prof. Mutambara, please.
Yeah, I'll answer two questions. The first one is whether regional blocs have helped the continental integration. Unfortunately, the answer is no. They have not helped. And you know why? Go back to 1963, the big debate between Nyerere and Nkrumah. Nkrumah was saying, ladies and gentlemen, these borders are artificial. These borders are not our borders. Let us move very quickly to produce the United States of Africa, one army, one foreign policy, one government. We must move very quickly towards the creation of the United States of Africa. That was Nkrumah. Nyerere said, no, let's do it brick by brick. Let's do it slowly. We build our regional blocks, East Africa, West Africa, Southern Africa. We nurture and build these blocks. Once these blocks are grown and good, we build them together to integrate Africa. And Nkrumah was saying, no, you're wrong. You're emphasizing territorial integrity on borders which are foreign. When these borders were created, one night, the next day, the woman was in Malawi and the husband was in Zimbabwe. Yeah? Anyway, Nkrumah lost the debate in 1963. Nkrumah lost. Who won was Nyerere. Nyerere won the debate. That's why we went the route of REX, the route of regional integration, SADC, East Africa, IGAD, ECOWAS. And with the view that eventually we're going to collapse into one colossus, United States of Africa. Unfortunately, it has not helped us. Nkrumah was right, Nyerere was wrong. And so, one, people are concentrating on these regional blocks, which they don't even support. They're concentrating on national sovereignty, as opposed to concentrating on continental integration. So, unfortunately, the answer is the REX have not helped continental integration because the assumptions were flawed, because Nyerere won a debate which he should have lost. The last question I'm going to answer is the issue of weak neighbors. You are very correct in the chat question there. You cannot succeed when your neighbors are weak. Nigeria must understand that. South Africa must understand that. There's no way South Africa can be a superstar economy when there's chaos in Zimbabwe, when there's chaos in Malawi. We now talk about what is called regional attractiveness, regional competitiveness. An investor sitting in Japan, in New York, in London will look at the region and say, how attractive is Southern Africa? How attractive is West Africa? So the fact that you got a strong economy, or supposedly strong economy in South Africa, won't help South Africa. South Africa will benefit if its neighbors are strong. Botswana, Malawi, Zimbabwe. So it is important that we realize that You are as strong as your neighbors. That's why regional integration is important. That's why continental integration is important, so that we can then work together, because with weak neighbors, South Africa might think they're strong, Nigeria, they are not strong if your neighbors are weak. We must emphasize regional competitiveness, regional attractiveness. We must emphasize, more importantly, continental competitiveness, continental attractiveness. I gave you the numbers: 1.4 billion Africans, $2.5 trillion. If I were to walk up and say, here come, I'm the African, I speak on behalf of 1.4 billion people. I have behind me a GDP of $2.5 trillion. The Chinese will listen to you, the Americans will listen to you, the Europeans the same, not out of love, out of economics. You'll be able to extract better deals. And also, this is my parting shot, the major argument against beneficiation has been, oh, there's no scale, we don't have the numbers. Once you have continental integration, the business case for beneficiation becomes obvious, because you're producing a car, you're producing a computer, you're producing a tractor for 1.4 billion people. That's a captive. That's the Chinese story. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prof. Dr. Akinola.
Thank you, Chair. I think I will start by commenting on the recently concluded African Union Commission's leadership elections, where regional sentiments reign supreme over continentalism. And the point I'm making is just that people are relatively more focused within than continentally. And when we are speaking about convergence of regionalism before we converge at the continental level, I know that almost 20 years ago, I was working on the ECOWAS common currency. And the expectation at the time was that the common currency tagged ECO with the Anglophone zone will be activated in 2009. That was almost 20 years ago. And even despite its move late last year around August, talking about the ECOWAS common currency, there's still no ECOWAS common currency. I think the expectations of continental leaders, particularly at the level of the AU, maybe they understand the truth and they are just being diplomatic. It's just that regionalism will lead to continentalism, but we have not seen any indices or any effective research to suggest that in the case of Africa. Absolutely, there's none. And I think, of course, many people are saying, would there be regionalism? I don't think any countries want to go into regional integration with Congo DRC now, with Sudan, with Nigeria, with Boko Haram, and people are busy trying to secure their national borders. And I don't think those political elites in Africa, particularly those struggling, almost all of them are struggling, are keen in integrating the economy with the economy of weaker countries. We have seen that in the free trade regime, where many countries even refuse to be signatories to AFTA. And even when AFTA kickoff, up till now, there's still no free movement of persons, around Africa. But of course, there are free movement of goods, and I know that that is against the law of economics, because the law of economics says when capital moving, people should move with capital. But we have not seen that in Africa. So I am exceedingly pessimistic about the prospect of regionalism in Africa for now and perhaps in the next 1 decade. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. We will do a final round of questions. We're really out of time. Hakeem, I noticed that your hand was up. Would you please go ahead and ask your question?
Thank you very much. My name is Hakeem Tijani from NISA Ibadan, Nigerian Social and Economic Research. My comment is about security along the axis of a Sahel region. And I want to go theoretically by realism. It argues that national security is the main thing in the state. And when we talk about this integration, realism talks about the essence, the importance of state in making an integration, especially international affairs. Now, if you look around the corridor of Sahel region, almost every state there is not secure. In other words, if you talk about other states that are in this corridor of Sahel region, chances are that they will still go against the integration of ECOWAS. Because now, all the 3 states that have left, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, one of the things which they held against ECOWAS was that ECOWAS could not guarantee their security, that ECOWAS could not fight against terrorism in their state. Now, if we now look at other regions, other states along that corridor, like Senegal, like Gambia, even Nigeria, no state along that corridor is secure. In other words, when we talk about integration, it's going to be a bit difficult for ECOWAS to really get its house in order. And as Professor Sages talked about fragmentation, I think it's a process that where we pray, it never leads to what West Africans are not expecting. Because if this trend of insecurity keeps going, I don't think if we can have integration. Because the main issue in the state, the main essence of the state is to guarantee security of its people. And now no state can say that, oh, it can be said to be secure. That's my point. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Let me pick 2 or 3 questions, and then unfortunately we have to wrap this up. My sincere apologies. One of the questions is, don't you think more countries will leave ECOWAS due to the spiraling effect of conflict? By the time they see the way they support coup leaders, it might lead to more than just a coup. So what does this mean for other countries and the populations in those countries of ECOWAS? And then someone says, can you say something about the impact of AFRICOM on the prospects for regional integration in Africa? And let's see here. Finally, how can ECOWAS progress economically with fragmentation caused by Western powers wreaking havoc on the regional body? So those are just the 3 final questions. Again, I apologize that we have to wrap this up. Perhaps Dr. Akinola, you can start, and then we'll go to Prof. Mutambara and then Prof. Osage. Thank you. Just 2 minutes, please.
I really don't envy the officials of ECOWAS at this point in time, and neither do I envy the officials of even the African Union. Because if you speak to them privately, then they show their pessimism and as if they have given up on the conflict situation in Africa. And I understand that people may want to argue that ECOWAS, particularly coming from the coupists in the Sahel, that ECOWAS has failed to guarantee security. They have not promoted good governance or effective governance, as they may call it, that terrorism kept spreading. But even the countries where the military have taken over power, where they use such argument to say we will promote security and all of that. And we also know that insurgencies have increased in many of the countries under military government. Even the military regime themselves had to run under the protective arms of mercenaries from foreign non-African countries. So the question of ECOWAS not being able to guarantee security within its bloc is not really the main reasons why the military struck in those countries. And one thing we may also want to say, okay, for instance, Mali came to power more than 4 years ago. So what is the plan of the military regime? Do they want to perpetuate in power forever? And if you speak to people living in some of these countries, then they will actually reveal that many of them are living in fear with the activities of non-state groups. It's still the same thing. Of course, we are seeing some elements of development, But my point is just that military regime do not guarantee governance, even if it is not good governance, maybe effective governance or peace and security. When somebody talked about African, well, maybe we'll leave that for another day because it really has nothing to do with regionalism. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, Prof. Mutambara.
Very briefly, security is very important. The citizens of a country must be secure. Yes, our interests must be aligned. Otherwise, if they are not aligned, we can't integrate and there's no motivation for integration. But what I want you to interrogate is when you say a state, when you say a country in Africa, what are you referring to? Rwanda, Zimbabwe, Botswana. Botswana, there are more Botswana people in South Africa than in Botswana. The conflict in the DRC right now is because there are Tutsi people in the DRC and there are Tutsi people in Rwanda. Those boundaries are very artificial. And hence we need to quickly integrate and remove these artificial borders. If DRC, Rwanda, and Burundi were one country, who is going to be fighting who? Because right now, the people who are Tutsi and are in the DRC are being treated as foreigners in the DRC. And the people who are in Rwanda intervening in the DRC to protect their kinsmen, for their people, right? So we must understand that we have a problem, a historical problem of colonialism. I saw someone saying, why are we emphasizing numbers? Don't we have Sweden is doing well and Switzerland is doing well as a small country? You have no option like that because you never created a country. You're not a country. Sweden is a country, Switzerland is a country, but Rwanda is not a country. Zimbabwe is not a country. It's an artificial country, but Botswana is an artificial country. So when we look at this option, why can't we just be a small country and do well? We have no option like that. We're fragmented through the Berlin Conference of 1884. So our future belongs to integration, regional and continental. So yes to security of state, yes to the aligning of interests, but we must remember these countries we call countries are not countries. They are products of artificial borders. Let me conclude on this point. There's no such thing as a free lunch. Integration is not free. Continental integration is not free. Regional integration is not free. It will cost you something. You have to give up on national sovereignty to embrace regional sovereignty. You must give up on national sovereignty to embrace continental sovereignty. You have to bleed to be integrated. The United States of America, your favorite country, right? They bled to create the United States of America. More people died in the Civil War in America to keep America together than the people who died in the First World War and Second World War together. More Americans died in the Civil War to keep America together than Americans who died in the First and Second World put together. So when you see this country called the United States of America, it didn't come on the cheap. The Americans bled, they fought a war, they died. So Africans don't expect a free lunch in terms of integration, continental and regional integration. You must pay the price. The question is, what price are you prepared to pay?
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have lost Prof. Osagi. Are you on there, Prof? Please go ahead.
You haven't lost me at all.
I found you.
Yes.
Please go ahead.
Thank you for finding me. Well, I mean, very quickly, I like the point about having to look back inwards. That was the template set by the Lagos Plan of Action in 1980. And, we have had, the mantra of African solutions to African problems. Now, I think that, when we are challenged in this manner, the way ECOWAS has been challenged, we have to search for things that work. I'm happy to say to us, that in spite of the fragmentation going on in ECOWAS, we still retain the multinational joint task force that has soldiers and so on from Chad, from Nigeria, from Cameroon, and from Niger. And that continues to function as one of the homegrown security outfits that we have in this part. I think there's agreement that the greatest threat right now in West Africa is the threat of insecurity. And insecurity, has been with us it has taken on the character of an industry all of its own. We have, all of these complex geopolitical involvements that have seen Russia and China and, France and all of them coming in and going out. Now, that is the greatest challenge that we face right now. Now, how to minimize these externalities and see how we can, come together using models that we are getting familiar with to address that. But let no person be deceived. If we cannot solve problems of insecurity and solve the problems of existential, livelihoods, these very difficult things that we're all going through, we are not likely to go forward. In Nigeria, we call that a non-kinetic approach, to dealing with issues of, nationhood and integration. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much to our panelists for taking on these questions and comments. Unfortunately, I cannot take any more. I see a hand is up. Perhaps you can engage the panelists in another setting, or perhaps speak to the organizers and they can link you up together. Thank you everyone for your contributions, for your insightful comments and questions. Many points have been made today. I think we've had a very good debate, discussion, and so on. And I just want to conclude with the following, based on what we've talked about today. First is that we must go back to the foundation. And these are member states and political leaders who make up ECOWAS. And there's a need for self-introspection, because that then becomes the starting point for conversations about how to ensure economic prosperity, how to deal with corruption and true democracy. And so we cannot talk about regionalism or integration without going back to member states and leaders within those entities. A second point is, what is the will of the people? This is quite key. When we talk about integration, the populations within these borders should be priority. The second thing that emerged, I think, is there a commitment to regional integration, or is there commitment when it suits a state's interest? And I think this is something that needs reflection, especially for member states of ECOWAS. Integration cannot take place truly when there are individual interests that try to manipulate the system to please their own foreign policy directives and so on. Fourthly, Africa does not exist in isolation. There are many players involved in this integration process. Some of them want disintegration. Some of these actors or players want division and further fragmentation. So how can we contend with these players who perhaps are trying to shift us away from true continental integration? Fourthly, we need to document and acknowledge that Africa has a lot of experience, lessons learned when it comes to regionalism. Are we documenting these? Are we learning from the past in that process? And I hope we're all in some way contributing to that process. And in conclusion, the role of non-state entities, African agency goes beyond political leaders? What about academia? What about the trade sector? What about civil society? All of these are different groups that engage regionally. And as we've emphasized, they do play a key role in regionalism, and there have been many successes on that end. So thank you again for your time. Thank you to our speakers with your brilliant presentations. And of course, a final thank you to the Institute of the Future of Knowledge for giving us this space to engage. I wish you all a very good evening.